Maybe we should do that. We'll say, yeah, I'm Dan.
I'm Fred.
And we're Engineering of Awesome. Today we're going to talk about interviews.
Interviews.
It's an interesting topic, very controversial topic. I wanted to ask you this question to kick us off because I have a theory.
Mm-hmm.
I reckon you can interview somebody in 5 minutes and know if they're good or not. A good software engineer.
The 5-minute hypothesis.
Yep.
Experiment. 5 minutes, you say?
5 minutes. 5 minutes is all I need.
5 minutes.
That's it. What do you reckon? You can disagree. You can be my first hater.
I don't want to be a hater, but I'm thinking 5 minutes. I would love to hear how do you get what you need out of 5 minutes.
I reckon I spend the first 5 minutes with a quick assessment, and then I spend the rest of the interview kind of second guessing, not second guessing, but checking if I think my first 5 minutes were correct. That's kind of the vibe, I think. And in that 5 minutes, I think good engineers, I think when you've interviewed a lot of engineers, I think good software engineers have a certain pattern, right? This is like the ultimate pattern matching exercise. So you're like
5 minutes matching patterns.
Pattern matching, right? So I'm applying good engineering pattern matching principles to software engineering interviews, mate. In interviews, right? I'm in a good software engineer. I'm looking for somebody that can solve problems well, who thinks about who takes time, I guess, to think about what they're doing. So they're not just kind of rushing into something. It's more like, I'm going to think about the problem that's in front of me and maybe think about a couple of solutions and maybe think about what's better and what's not, maybe have a conversation about it. I think I'm looking for people who are aligned in good software engineering principles and practices. So they care about certain things that help them in their job, help them be more productive, develop higher quality code, get things like faster feedback, and they generally have opinions about those kinds of things because they care. I'm probably looking for people who can communicate, who can collaborate. If it's a senior role, then I'm looking for, or senior or above, then I'm probably including, can facilitate technical discussions with a team, can make kind of technical decisions that are pretty good. They're kind of, they have experience in mentoring, coaching people, building up other people in the team, kind of helping the team move to a high-performing state, especially for like a lead engineer, staff engineers. Like, can you actually influence a group of engineers and help them move to a better place? I think those are the things I'm looking for, ultimately, right? And whether you can code, let's say, like, that's one section I'm looking for. In the first 5 minutes, I think I can assess most of those things in 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes?
Yep.
It took you 10 minutes just to go through that list.
And I haven't finished yet. There's actually another set of area, which is like how well you can code. So we can't do that you can do that in 5 minutes, but that's another 5 minutes on top. So.
All right.
That's my 10 minutes.
So take me through this 5 minute exercise with an interview. Right, I'm that newbie that you want to employ as your number one, the best engineer you've ever had, the one who's going to change the world.
Yep.
The one who buys you donuts.
Yes.
The one who doesn't code in Ruby. So here I'm sitting in the room. Right?
Yep.
And you've just met me.
Yep.
Clock starts.
Yep.
5 minutes.
Yep. I say to you, Fred, tell me about what you've been working on recently.
What I've been working on? Well, I've been making the world a better place, writing some really good code and implementing and writing tests and mentoring, and I'm looking after making sure that whatever goes to production is a good quality.
And how do you do that? How do you make sure that what you put into production is good quality? Well,
that's a good question, Dan. how do I make sure that it's good quality? Well, I make sure that we use good quality practices in our team. So we make sure that whatever gets submitted to GitHub, to our source code repository, is either co-authored or peer-reviewed, and we've got static analysis, and we've got tests, and we've got a consistent pipeline, and we've got monitoring and observability available. We got synthetic tests out there to give us that early feedback once it's gone to production. We're using doc releases as part of that process.
You're hired, Fred. Well, the thing is, the answers you gave to those questions, right, I would say a very strong signal. Now, we cheated a little bit because you're a principal engineer, so you're obviously going to be like, of course, all those things are important.
That's why I actually did this, because I wanted you to say it. I'm a principal engineer and I'm really great. Sometimes we want to hear these things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm happy to help. So it's interesting that you name those things. But if someone was in an interview and named those things, they're not things that every engineer thinks about.
And that's an interesting question, because would you expect every engineer to be focusing on this? Or how do we ensure that engineers has got that approach of highlighting those key critical things that you would be thinking about?
Yeah, well, I think if those kind of things, let's say high quality code to production, right? Mm-hmm. If those kind of things are important to you, then I would say, okay, hire engineers who agree with you, that also share the same views, that, yeah, these things are important. If you hire engineers who are aligned to those things, you're going to get those things because they're going to care for you. I actually do this a lot, I suppose, along my career, because I did once work at a place where I came and there were a few, the percentage of engineers who were aligned to those kinds of principles that you're talking about, were probably not as, the ratio wasn't as high as I would have liked. So I'm an engineering leader coming into the business, talking to a whole bunch of engineers and getting a feel for where people are at, And one of the first things that I did was to say, okay, we're going to expect in the interview process that engineers align to these principles. And then over time, what started to happen was we hired a lot of those engineers. They then hired more engineers who align as well to those principles, because we hired them as, okay, you're the type of engineer that expects this type of practice. They then they walk around the building thinking that that's normal. And when they see it, when they're interviewing, they're also looking for the same patterns, right? So you get more and more, a bit of a snowball effect, I think, of more and more engineers. Slowly that changes culture, where the engineering practices within the company move and shift more and more into a higher quality code and a bunch of engineers that care about it. So I think if you care about it, like interviewing, I actually, I would say over my career, whatever level of success I've had, I think a lot of it is to do with being good at interviews. Like I've put a lot of time and effort to try and be good at interviews. And the reason why, I think, is because it pays off with things like this. If you can hire really great engineers, you can make a whole huge impact as a leader by hiring engineers who care about these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is you hire what you're looking for, and then it becomes that snowball effect. I was wondering if you're not creating it's another word with a C that ends with a T, which is a cult in the organization.
It could have been a very different four-letter word, Fred. I'm glad
I realized when I was like, okay, I'm not going to go with this one.
Where are you going with this, Fred?
Everybody
goes, if you're going to have a cult, wouldn't you want a cult of awesome engineers?
But then how do you bring in something that could improve or change the growth mindset if you're purely looking for a specific thing. And that's why I'm going back to that shell that you see on the beach, that one individual that's probably not 100% aligned with what you're looking for, but there's something there that you pick up and you're going, hold on, this could be beneficial for the organization, beneficial for the team. Maybe not 100%, maybe there's key factors, so you identify one or two of those values you're looking for, but there's always something that you just look at somebody and you're like, hold on, this person's got something that I can see that it could change things for us. Otherwise, we're basically just getting the same person, a repetitive hiring of the same individual with the same mindset, and then suddenly everybody's okay. Well, imagine you started with somebody who doesn't like testing, and then everybody starts hiring somebody who doesn't like testing, and then one person, hey, we should be writing tests, and so, oh, what? I'm not going to hire you because we don't like writing tests.
That's what happens.
Yeah.
It happens in the opposite effect just as much.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you mentioned growth mindset, because I want to backtrack everything I said and say that growth mindset is actually one of the most important things that I look for. The other thing I look for is continuous learning. So if someone has demonstrated growth mindset, continuous learning, and probably a focus on the customer, those three factors I think are quite strong predictors for me. That I do agree with what you're saying. There's a spectrum of skills, right? People can be, I'm an awesome software engineer, I write the best tests, right? And there can be a different side of the spectrum, which is like, I've never written a test, but I work at a place that doesn't let me write tests, and I'm just hankering to go and write tests. I want to work at a place that writes tests. Why? Because I think it's important. I think it's good. I do it on my side projects. It helps me reduce the amount of bugs I ship to production. I don't want to be in this hacky kind of environment anymore. I want to work at a place that does good code and have good practices, right? If somebody came to an interview and said that, I'd be like, cool, all good. All good. They would still have to, there'd be other things. We still haven't got to the code part yet. But I think a lot of growth mindset and continuous learning makes up for a lot of things. Because but it's an interesting example, because if you have a culture that needs changing, then I think it is important to seed certain engineers who are very strongly aligned to the practices you want to see, and who can also adapt and understand that you're not there. There's like a journey. That's like, look, we do want these really great practices, but we're here right now. So, but we want to hire you because you think like this. We hire you because you're aligned to this end goal. Help us get from where we are to where we want to be. That is totally valid way of hiring someone, I think, if you're in that circumstance. But I think if you have a bunch of good engineers who are already doing really great practices, I think that frees you up to go, cool, I can hire people who are at different levels of skill in all sorts of different areas, but they're growth minded, they focus on the customer, they know how to learn. Bringing those kind of engineers in is also awesome.
I agree. I'm looking for somebody who comes in that either have 20 or 30% of what we're looking for, and then taking it on and growing in that space, but also the ability to identify the future and the things we need to do, and that we don't stagnate. We are constantly moving towards and keeping up with the trends and the things that is going to help us to deliver the value that our customers are looking for.
Yep. So what do you think, Fred? Could you do it in 5 minutes?
I could do it in 5 minutes, but I probably would add at least another 3 minutes just to at least give the candidate an opportunity to introduce themselves, make them feel comfortable.
Fair enough.
Because I think one of the things that I've seen over the years is that we come into an interview and we're very stressed and very anxious.
Yep.
and there's a lot of expectation. And I think sometimes we're also not sure what we're coming into. And if you can just get somebody to, my personal way that I do it in interviews is that I emphasize that it's not an interview. It's a conversation.
Yep.
I just want to learn about you. I want to understand who you are, and I want to see what you can bring to an organization, and for you an opportunity to get an understanding of what it would be like working in this organization based on the experience you're having today.
Yep.
And if we can do that for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or an hour, great. But if we're coming into that conversation and saying, and I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions, or I'm going to try to catch you out, or I'm going to make you feel little because I know something you don't, then I think we're failing.
I totally agree. I actually think the first 5 minutes are so critically important because it dictates the style. So it's a good style example that you gave about having a conversation. I agree totally. The other thing I would say on top of that is in those first 5 minutes, if I think you're good in the first 5 minutes, my style of interview will adapt dynamically during the interview. I will go more into a sales mode. So I will actually be selling the role and the company and the team to this person if I know that they're good. So the first 5 minutes are kind of critical because I'm looking for if they do think they're great, then I will definitely change my style because I'm like, I want to make sure that my theory is that those people who are exceptional, right, particularly who stand out very strongly in the first 5 minutes, right, everybody gets the same kind of vibe mostly when that person walks into an interview, right? Which means all the other companies that compete with you for talent are going to be doing this, having the same reaction, like, oh wow, this person's great. Like we should hire this person right now. And so I want to try then I'll flip it and be like, cool. Like it's more I kind of treat the if I spend the first 5 minutes of like, cool, you're a great engineer, then I'm flipping it to like, cool, now you interview me because I know you're great. That's already, I don't need to worry about that anymore. Now you can find out from me what the team's like, what the company's like, what the opportunity's like. You can find out from me everything you need to know if this is a good place or not. So I find myself kind of, I do warn people sometimes when I interview with them, if they're in interviews with me, that like I may switch styles. You might see me do a certain type of interview and then I'll switch to a different type. And it's all dependent upon, it's very subtle. It's not like, I don't massively change everything. But
yeah, you don't put on a hat and say, role play.
Yeah, I kind of,
partner.
it's very subtle. You see, you'll see me do similar things across interviews, but the style will be slightly different because I'll be trying to sell. So yeah, that's why I think those first 5 minutes are so important.
How important is the, in a standard interview process, putting the 5 minutes aside for a minute or for 5 minutes, the questions so that end of the process when you've gone through whatever you want to verify and you're getting to, okay, it's time for you to ask questions. How important is that to you?
Yeah, I think it's really important. So if they're a really good engineer, if I think they're really good in the first part of the interview, I will ask them earlier in the process what questions they have for me. So I will try to hand off the interview, I guess, to the candidate and say, look, because I mean, I'm saying I'm happy. This is great. Now, and so I'm not trying to be just one-sided with the interview. I want to have a true conversation. I want them to ask me great questions because the great questions usually tell me also more about who they are as an engineer, the type of questions they ask, the things that they care about. They will come out in those questions. I have been in interviews where I was the candidate and the leader who interviewed me, there was one in particular I remember who I just asked questions the entire time. And I had to ask at least twice or three times, you sure you don't want to ask me any questions? Because like, I'm running the whole interview. And he's like, no, that's fine. Like the questions that you're asking tell me a lot about who you are, what you care about and all that stuff. I agree with that. I think, what do you think?
Look, I think it's important to ask questions. But I think it's also important the type of questions that you come with.
Yeah.
And it also demonstrates maybe the investment up to the point. So I think it's important that you have a good understanding of the organization that you're planning to join, and to understand, at least have some form of understanding of the role. And then using that as the anchor for the questions or the conversation you want to have at that point. I'm questioning, sometimes I'm questioning when we're talking about the tech stack. So
Yeah.
tell me about the tech stack. So, what are you using? Or, where are you hosting, that kind of, because sometimes I wonder how important is that as an engineer, because you should be able to come in and adapt into any environment and solve those problems. For me, it's more about solving problems,
Yeah.
almost to the point where the question should be, okay, so, what are the problems we're trying to solve? What's the strategy at this stage? What are we trying to achieve as an organization? How much autonomy does the team have to make decisions? How successful have the team been in implementing those changes that we're looking for? How do we measure?
Yeah. They're all really great questions, because I think it a lot of teams can look very different, and sometimes there are cultures of certain teams you might not be that attractive to you as an engineer, right? Like, if they don't have the right level of autonomy or the right level of learning, if the things that are important to you. I don't so much, for me personally, I don't really care if people don't know about the company or the role. But what I do hope for is that people come with what they do care about and ask me questions about it. Because if you care about autonomy, then, or path to production, ask me about that. Ask, like, some of the questions that you mentioned. Like, ask me how a team prioritizes their work, or what they've achieved recently, or how they went about it. There could be questions about tooling and that kind of thing. I think all those questions are really important. It tells me that you care about those things, which is, I don't know, good for me to know. If you care about the same things I care about, then we're going to get along great.
Interestingly enough, it is, when you start asking those kind of questions, you'll gauge whoever is interviewing you, if they understand that space or if they're from that space.
Sure.
And if they're going to give you it's like buying a car, and you go into, and a salesperson comes up to you and they say, like, so, yeah, how many, what's the spec on this? And they go, actually, I have no idea.
Yep.
I don't even know this is a car, but I can tell you how much it costs. Yeah, it just doesn't, then you're like, I don't feel as comfortable having this conversation.
Yep.
5 minutes.
5 minutes. I think it can be done. I'm surprised you agree with me, Fred, because I find it a controversial question. A lot of people kind of just say, no way, it can't be done in 5 minutes.
But have you been in a situation when you meet somebody and in the first minute you know that if you're going to be getting along with the person,
Yeah,
you're
definitely.
going to be able to have a strong relationship? And sometimes even if you go to the point where you challenge yourself and saying, hold on, maybe this is too early to make up your mind or to get a sense of it. And then if you go back and you look back after a few months or 2 years and go like, yeah, done and dusted.
Yep. Well, I think it's one of the best engineers I ever hired. Actually, a couple that one in particular. But if I think about, there's a few that kind of stick in my memory about engineers I've interviewed and hired. They were great from the first minute all the way through to all of the interactions. Like, they asked really great questions. When they talked about their work, they talked about, they had a growth mindset, I guess, about the work that they were doing. So they expressed it with that kind of language. They knew about the customer impact of the work they were doing. They asked really great clarifying questions when there were, like, technical things to ask about or talk through. I just knew that all of those kind of touch points were, I guess, confirming the first 5 minutes, right? Of like, hey, I think this person's really great. And then hiring them and seeing them work, it's for those that are in that pocket. I get really excited, I think. Like if I'm in an interview and the first 5 minutes and that person's kind of giving me that vibe, I'm like, this is going to be great. This is going to be a great interview.
It is one of the greatest feelings when you in a moment and you were just waiting for one or two words to come out.
Yep.
And just pinpointing to specific things, and then there it is. And you know, okay, I'm on the wave, I'm surfing, and this is gonna be a ride.
That's it.
So Dan, you were talking about code.
Yeah,
Part of the code. Interview of 5 minutes.
I think that so for me personally, this is where some controversy exists.
Here we go.
And
here we go.
My opinion personally is that if you talk about code, it's kind of meta, right? It's abstract. It's not, you and I can talk about code, the ins and outs of code, but I find for me personally, if I have code in front of me, right, or we're working on code together, that is a vastly different experience, I find, that people could even say all these great things, but in the expression of their problem solving, I suppose, with code, I think you still have to be able to write good code. And a lot of good code, I think, is written as other people can understand it. Like it solves its problem well, it's performant, it's secure, it's all these kind of things. But also, it's easily extendable. It's the right level of abstraction for the problem that you're solving. Those kinds of factors, I think, you can get to that view much faster if you're doing code together. So I want to see code in the interview process somehow, some way, which we can get into the specifics. But just talking about it is too meta for me. It's like, let's just not talk about it. Let's just code together, and we can go through the ins and outs of what you think good is.
Yeah, when you say this is going to be controversial, right? I started feeling sweaty and heart palpitations, and a sense of the calm that I had before is leaving my body.
Why is that, Fred?
In this room? Because
why is that?
Because I struggle with the fairness of writing code in an interview.
Yep.
It feels like the power balance is out. The person coming into the interview is in a disadvantage as soon as we say we need to write code. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And especially if we don't give the person an opportunity to prepare something up front. Because it's that old thing about my coding style. How do I approach a problem? And I think that's the key thing. Is how do we approach a problem? If we look at using coding or using a exercise where we're saying, right, we're going to pay on this, we're actually going to try to find a solution for X. You can use Google, you can use whichever resources you want to use, and we're going to try to work it out together. And we use that as a way of assessing the problem-solving skill. I think that steering towards a bit more a fair approach.
I think I agree. I actually agree. I'm quite flexible in how code is done. So my baseline is I want to see code. How it's done, I'm pretty easy. I'm pretty flexible on how it's done. So if a candidate wants to take a coding exercise, take it home, write some great code, spend a week or something writing great code, bring it back, and we go through it together, that's perfectly fine with me. and that's in their own environment.
Do you think it's fair to ask?
Yeah, I actually think I was thinking about this chat just before we got on the call, and I think so. I have another option for people that I give in interviews. The other option is if you have code that you have done for another company, a coding exercise as a part of the interview, and you want to use that and bring that into the next session, I'm happy to do that. I will take other companies' coding exercises and I'll review that. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy. I have one I prepared earlier if you want to do that way. The other option I give people is if you already have code that's public on GitHub or what have you, it can be anything, any language, and any project. If you have code in that's publicly open source or whatever, and you want to bring that in and show that to me as an example of what you can do, I'm also up for that too. So I give 3 options usually for people, and they can choose which one they want to do.
Is this a 5-minute coding exercise, or are we extending this to the hour that was left in the interview?
Yeah.
Ding dong.
So
Hello.
they do it, but the thing is, right, if you look at some alternative options, I actually think the options that I just talked about are the fairest out of all the other options, because I'm not a big fan of springing a problem on someone live in the interview. I'm not a fan of that at all. I'm not a fan of leak code exercises because people actually spend like 6 months studying that stuff to try and like be competent at it on the fly in an interview situation. I don't think that's reasonable. So I actually think the 3 options I talked about are the fairest of them all.
Do you believe that the coding exercise should be in the language that your organization is using?
No.
Do you believe that it needs to be in Ruby?
Well, I may have a preference.
You would have a preference that it's got to be in
I
Ruby.
may have a preference, and maybe I might look more fondly upon your coding exercise if it's done in a language I like.
Yeah. So you're saying that the language that's being used is going to influence how you view the coding exercise?
You know what I find interesting about that topic? If somebody uses a language I'm not familiar with, I think it's actually better. Because if I can understand it, it's usually going to be decent code.
Yeah.
So if you've written it in a way that I can understand and I don't know the language, I think that's a really good sign. So I will, and the other thing it does, which I find I actually really enjoy, is in the interview, I will ask stupid questions because I don't know the language. But if you can explain it to me, then I'm effectively like a stand-in for a junior engineer, right, in the team. I will ask a question that seems kind of obvious and maybe I'll look stupid, but I find them fascinating and really a great way to ask somebody a question and see how good they are at mentoring, coaching, explaining things to somebody else. I actually think it's really good. So when I see something done in a language I'm not familiar with, I think that's actually better.
So I'm a big fan of the junior developer scenario. I use that in my interviews. I like to ask an engineer, can you approach this as if you're pairing with a junior developer? Because you can learn a lot. But I actually, funny enough, I agree with you. It does make a difference. It also forces you as the interviewer to focus a lot. Yep. So you really have to be involved in that coding exercise because you're basically learning something instead of using a language. And it probably removes that opinionated view, that we build up over the years. Like, oh, you're doing it like that.
I had that problem actually. I was working at a company and I was a part of a group of engineers that were reviewing coding exercises as a part of the recruitment process. And I also had other engineers that were doing it alongside me. And I would usually kind of collect feedback and summarize things or kind of help hiring managers make a decision, right? And it was kind of interesting because it was fairly common, and I had to give a lot of feedback to a lot of engineers that they would review. So we would ask them to do it in a specific language, aka Ruby, and
let's just spoil the day.
But what was interesting was there were quite a lot of engineers who would critique the style of code, like critique the use of white space or critique the use of, maybe they were a Java developer usually, and they use kind of Java-y kind of styling in naming of classes or variables or patterns and stuff like that, right? It was quite common. A lot of engineers would critique that stuff, and I would have to explicitly take that out of the feedback and give them feedback and say, look, we're not here to critique that kind of thing, because what we're asking for, so the philosophy at that place, which I think was right, is that you can come from any language background, but we use Ruby in the team, so you just have to be willing to do Ruby and learn it and all that stuff, right? But it meant that in the interview process, you had people who were good at Ruby and people who were good at something else. But we asked them to do Ruby in the interview process. So that meant that the quality of Ruby you had was all over the shop. You had Java developers, you had .NET developers, you had JavaScript people, PHP people, the whole shebang, right? So I had to continually kind of give feedback and say, hey, it's not about the semantics of, the styling of Ruby and how it should be done. This is more like, can this person code? That's what we're actually trying to look for. So it was kind of common.
Do you think that comes with experience when you look at code and you're actually identifying the actual ability you're looking for and removing that critique and focusing on the stuff that's less important?
Yeah, I think so, because there is an element of where the style does impact the code. Like, it could be like very difficult to read because the person who's styling their code in a certain way is actually like, it's tripping you up, right? So there are ways that you can code which, may reflect a style, but this is why I actually say to people in the interview process these days, do it in any language you want. And I specifically say to them, yes, we have these languages that we work with, but I want you to do the coding exercise in your strongest language. So I want to try to avoid a situation where I'm asking them to cross over into a language they don't know, because then I'm not being able to assess the right thing, right? Then I'm assessing maybe how well their most commonly used language maps into the language we use, which is kind of like, who cares? That's not important. Like, I want them to use their best language so I can assess their best level of skill where they're at in what they know. And then I want to assess, can they move over to this other thing, which is another thing entirely.
So I'm going to chuck something out there, just thinking about this. In this day and age, where we have lint and we have formatting and we have IDEs that tells you, hey, what you're doing is a bit silly. Do we expect engineers to incorporate those practices, whichever language they use?
Yeah, it does take a lot of things out of the mix. Although, even in using some of those tools, you can get teams that will not so much use a standard, or they'll kind of shoehorn their own stuff into it. Like, we'll put our own linting rules into it.
Why? Why are we doing this?
Because you can. That's the problem. You should take that option away.
So then, something that I thought maybe we should talk about as part of interviews, and I would like to get your opinion on it, especially being that there's more awareness of neurodiversity out there. So I was thinking about, we were talking about being biased and having our own preference for somebody coming into the interview. How do you approach that when somebody comes into an interview that is neurodiverse? Or, how do you pick up or identify or make that person, or how do you not use that against the person?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think that good software engineers come in all shapes and sizes. In some respects, it's interesting from a team dynamic point of view, because the way I think about a team is teams are going to have different, or members of the team, sorry, are going to have different strengths and weaknesses, right? And everybody's going to have something. When I think about team formation, I think it's a really good approach to try and have differences across the team. Like, you have people who are strong in different areas and they work together as a team and they leverage each other's strengths. And I think it's not so much that it's really just because people express themselves, think about things in certain ways. All of that doesn't really matter to me. It's more about the outcomes and things like that, which is kind of like, how were they able to, what outcomes did they get in their previous work and how did that all work? How did they function? What did they care about in that process? What did they add to the process? What value did they bring? Can they express that to me? Can we kind of unpack that together? And that sometimes they can look different in different styles. Sometimes you can have a style where someone is very direct. Maybe, and it could be for different reasons. Sometimes cultural background, sometimes a neurodiversity thing, but someone can be brutally direct, right? That kind of thing I'm not fussed about. And I think it actually goes back a little bit further than just that interview itself, because if you build a team culture where those kinds of differences in people are leveraged, and that's like the common pattern that is used, I think that's actually a critical part of a high-performing team, is that the high-performing team recognizes what people are good at and works within that, leverages that within each other. And I think engineers actually do it pretty well in general. Like, when group of engineers come together, I find that it's subtle sometimes, but engineers usually know who's good at what. And I think engineers are pretty good at kind of picking up, oh, this person's really great at Terraform or something like that, right? So when we have to go to do our DevOps stuff, I'm just going to hit up this person. And you see it, it's a pattern, right? Somebody gets hit up a lot for certain things within the team. And I think, great. Like, I think engineers are quite good at understanding the strengths of different people. And so when I'm looking to form teams, I don't want everyone the same. Because if everyone's the same, it's kind of boring. And also, if everyone's the same, you don't get the team. I don't know, if everyone's different, they learn to rely on each other more. It's like we work as an actual team unit, right? Because you have different strengths and everyone's bringing value and they're teaching each other as well from the strengths. So you can go to this person and learn more about Terraform. Oh man, that's awesome. And it kind of forms relationships, stronger bonds in the team, helps the team perform better. They do it as a team, as a unit. So I think actually that's kind of my philosophy on stuff. So that's how I'm thinking about it. Sometimes that means, though, that when I'm interviewing people, if I have a certain spot in the team, in mind, sometimes that means that I can't hire that person if they don't, maybe they're too much the same as everyone else in the team, right? And it'd be like, actually, like I might think they're a great engineer, but I can't actually put them into the team because it's not the right team format, right? Not the right team structure. You know what I mean? What do you reckon?
Look, you were talking about the team knows who to go to. And funny enough, I had the same experience in my teams, when they've identified when they need to come to me. And that was purely just to make coffee. Yeah, I would sit at my desk and hoping that somebody would ask me about Terraform or writing good code, or, hey, do you want a pair? It's normally I was like, hey, Fred, you think you can round up a few coffees for the team? And I'm a team player, and I've been doing this for years. Yeah.
Sometimes that's what it takes. Donuts, coffee.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do bring some value to the team. But on a more serious note, not that coffee's not serious.
No.
I totally agree. There's got to be a diversity, and there's got to be a balance in a team. If you have too many strong individuals, you're creating a time bomb. And you need different personalities to balance it out. You also want to bring in, again, this is that opportunity where you're looking at someone and say, actually, this could be the opportunity for somebody to grow in this space. Could be challenging. It could be different. Also, you could look at a team and say, this team is at the phase in their career as a group that they're ready to take on a challenge of bringing somebody in that is not aligned maybe with the exact culture, the way the team works, to actually test, are they a team that works together to bring in somebody new and then forming a strong relationship and uplifting that person.
Yep. Yeah. I think from what I've seen, if you're a good engineer in air quotes that can look different, a good engineer can look so different in different contexts and different styles and personalities and stuff. Because I just think actually tech in itself is very broad. Like you have all these different flavors. If you got someone who's into front end, someone who's into back end, someone who's into DevOps, someone who's into data, there's all these different things that you can explore and experiment with and learn more about. And I find as engineers get more senior, they generally tend to, flow more towards the stuff they're interested in, and that tends to kind of give them a bit more flavor. But there's so many different things that it's like, you can. I think it's too broad to just go, I'm just going to hire this one narrow view of like what an engineer is or what I think is good or whatever. I don't think that's a successful philosophy on team building. It's too narrow and tech is too broad. And I think actually the anti-pattern to this is that if you hire engineers who are all kind of cut from the same cloth, I think what you end up with is you have a team that can't flex. Right? And the biggest problem for that from a leadership point of view is that tech is not like that. Tech is not in a box, really. Sometimes you have a system which is legacy or something that no one's touched for 5 years and no one knows how it works. But something happens to it, right? One day and you're like, we need to go and fix this. And if a team needs to be able to flex sometimes to do those kinds of things, right? And no one likes it. It's not an enjoyable thing that you have to do and go, I don't want to have to learn this old school kind of framework that no one's used for 10 years. No one enjoys it, but the team that can't rally around that and kind of go in and fix it, it causes massive problems, I think. As a team, as a unit, as an organization, it actually causes a lot of problems. So I don't think there's actually a world where you can have a nice little box where your tech sits in and everything's nice and doesn't diverge from these patterns, because sometimes over time things happen. You got legacy stuff, you got sometimes a curveball comes in where a big customer will come and say, we want to sign up and pay you all this money, but we need this feature, and you're kind of doing it in a rush and something forks off from something else, and all these kind of things happen over time. So I think the team has to be able to flex, and you don't get flex if everyone looks the same.
No. Do you believe that you should use the same approach? So you're hiring one engineer, using the same approach for every candidate in that for that specific role?
Like the same interview system?
Same
kind of
questions or same approach, structure?
No, I mix it up a bit, maybe because I get bored, I don't know. But I tend to flow with the candidate. So an interview for me, or a process for me, is very open-ended to a degree. I know what I want at the other side, but going into it, I'm pretty open to all sorts of different paths. And if the candidate, and I've had some awesome interviews from doing that, because I really want to see where the candidate shines. Like, I want to see what they're great at, and I want to see it demonstrated in the interview. If someone has been working on, let's say, encryption, right, for the last 6 months, and they've been deep into it, bring it to the interview and let's talk about it. Teach me, right? That's great, because cool, I get to see what they've been working on for 6 months, some really challenging things that they've been thinking through, how they achieved it, what they achieved rather, how they approached the problem, what they had to learn, who they had to go to get help from, how they worked through the problem solving process. All that stuff is so valuable. And I want to see, but the thing is, someone could be great in encryption. Someone could be great at security kind of concepts, right? Someone could be great at, design patterns. Someone could be great at testing. Someone could be great at DevOps. There's all these different things, right, that people are into. And I want to see and explore and talk about those things in the interview. Like, if you're really great at this, let's talk about it, because that's going to be the best example I get of who you are, how you learnt it, the stuff you're passionate about, the things that you're into, how you went about it. It's all highly valuable stuff for me. So it's all kind of open-ended, right? If a candidate starts talking about a certain topic and we just take a detour down this rabbit hole, cool, I'm all for that.
So we've been talking about the interview process, the 5-minute Dan approach, 2 donuts and a Ruby on the side.
Yeah.
But how do you manage? So you got 60 applicants coming in. How do you choose the candidates that you want to interview?
Yeah.
What's the magic, Dan?
Based off a resume or something?
Yeah. I mean, what is your? Do you look at resumes? Do you want a video? Do you want a phone call? I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually a tough one, I think.
I tend to ask tough questions, because I am a principal engineer. You mentioned
you're a very tough interviewer, Fred. Very tough interviewer.
Yeah. This was a tough question by Fred, the principal engineer.
I actually find that, let's say resumes, right? If you got 60 resumes in front of you. So there are things I will look for. I don't put too much weight on resumes, really. But if you're forced to prioritize, this is how I would do it. If someone has a GitHub link on their resume, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to be looking at your code. That's going to be first and foremost. That's probably the first primary thing I'm going to be looking at. If I can see really great code on your GitHub profile, then I will look at that. I'll be looking for high quality code, automated tests, bonus points for CI pipelines and deployment artifacts, documentation, what else? All those kinds of things, right? If you've got that in a repository that is upfront on your GitHub profile, then I'll be looking at it and I'll be making an assessment based off of that. If they don't have that, then I think one thing I tend to look for is the growth mindset within the language that they use to talk about their projects. So I think there's a certain style that growth-minded people tend to talk about themselves. It's not like hugely obvious. I think sometimes you have to kind of read between the lines a bit. You're trying to get a feel, I guess, for who someone is, right, on their resume. Now, not everybody is awesome at expressing themselves in written form and having, a great resume, which is why I don't put too much emphasis on a resume. But if someone does talk about, the certain flavor of who they are as an engineer, what they care about, if they've expressed things that they've been challenged by and learned and pushed through, and that's all really good sign. If they're in touch with the customer value of the things that they're building, and they understand that it's not just like I delivered a billing project, but it's like I delivered a billing project that halved the time that customers were served by, which is like great win, right? It's like it's talking about the value that the customer's getting. Those kinds of things are really great signs. So I'll probably prioritize them up front. So someone who has great code on GitHub, someone who has their resume and talks about those kinds of things, they'll probably be kind of first on the list, I reckon. What do you think?
What if you don't have code? What if you actually you're good at coding, right? You're good at solving problems, but you only do it in your work environment. right? That's your investment. The time outside of work, if we're focusing on other stuff, proving other skills or different interests, but you're not writing code and putting. That's not who you are. Plus, then you've decided to use Mr. AI to write your resume.
I think that hey, look, my personal opinion is that I actually think that it's of great benefit for software engineers, or for anyone actually, this applies to anyone, to gain good roles that are at good companies and good teams and good leaders, where you can choose like the opportunities that are best for you. I think somebody has to be decent at branding themselves, selling themselves, marketing themselves, negotiating for terms, salary, all that kind of stuff. Those kind of 4 skills are invaluable, in my opinion, in actually getting something great out of your career, right? And I spend a lot of time over the years. I've spent countless hours coaching, mentoring, training, public speaking about these topics, because I think you can ignore them, right? You can. It's possible. It's possible to get a job. It's harder these days in the current economy, but it's possible to get a job, walk into a job that, ticks a box. I want to code in .NET. I want to code in C#. Cool. You can probably find a job, right? But the challenge is, I think, that if you want a good job and you want to compete against good engineers for a really good job, then I think you have no choice, really, but to get good at branding, selling, negotiating. You have to at least have some rudimentary skills in that space. That's my personal view of it. And I will give people time, effort, and energy to help them achieve that. And people usually do. Like I teach them, say, negotiation skills in the salary negotiation. I've taught people specific things in their scenario, and they have got like a 20% bump on what they were expecting to get in the role. It's absolutely possible to do, and it's not that hard. And I understand that it's not fully natural for a software engineer to do, because their day-to-day world is not in that space, right? But those that know how to do those things, I think they stand out and they get the better roles. So I think it's up to you. If you want something great, I think there are ways and means that you can use to get there, but you have to put in that effort, I think, to get there.
Look, I 100% agree with you. It's the profile and how you're presenting yourself. That's the money. That's how you get in the door, and that's how you present yourself. And I think communication is such a key factor in that. If you can come into an interview and demonstrate who you are in a nice, fluent way, which is challenging for a lot of people. And then there's the reverse again, where the interviewer needs to be able to pick up on certain things to identify that it's not possible. But it's a key factor. The thing that I wish I could see more is what you're talking about, the investment of managers, senior managers in their teams, not purely just on the delivery perspective, but to be accountable for the growth of the individual and really pushing hard to ensure that we continuously grow and having those conversations. I personally feel like that is something that is lacking in the engineering world. You have individuals across organizations that is their ambassadors and their advocate for doing that and really caring. But we have so many managers and roles, that people management roles, that just does not invest enough in them. And then we're sitting with young people coming into the space who want to learn and grow, and they don't have somebody that challenges. And like, okay, so what are you thinking to do next? Are you using your personal development time? What are you using it for? What are you investing time to grow? I think you should be focusing on this, based on input and feedback from the team. These are the things you should be working on at the moment.
Yeah.
But it just feels like it's not there. It's an afterthought. And that's the sad part for me.
Yeah. I definitely see that different types of organizations, I guess, and as you get more senior in leadership, I've found that the emphasis on people and growth becomes lesser. Like a lot of the conversations you have as a more senior leader are more about deliverables or outcomes for the business, right? But I think, I mean, I've always kind of held the philosophy that you don't get great outcomes if your people are not working on making themselves great. Like if you want to hire really great people, you're almost forced to have that kind of culture, I think, in my mind, unless you want them to leave after 12 months, which is fine. Look, if you just want to, bring people in and replace them after 12 months, okay. But I don't think that's a very good approach to business.
No.
It costs a lot of money to hire people. There's a lot of like knowledge about systems and history and things like that are also valuable. There's a lot of relationships that get built that are valuable. All sorts of reasons, I think, as to why it's a good idea to have people stick around longer. But I think to do that, one of the major things I think that's most critical in this, partly it's culture, but I think there's one particular aspect, which is the learning part and growing part. I think that engineers generally, not all of them, but there's a good percentage of engineers in the industry that understand, even if it's just intuitive, they understand that the tech moves in the industry, right? There's always like a new version of the framework they're using. There's always these new patterns coming in. Sometimes there's some hype, sometimes there's some trendy stuff. But generally speaking, the industry doesn't sit still very long.
No.
And the thing about being an engineer as a career in that world is that if you sit still, you're actually going behind because the industry is moving past you. And I think a lot of engineers feel that, even if it's like an intuitive feeling, right? That I need to be growing ideally faster than the industry, right? I need to be growing at a certain pace and a certain speed to stay relevant, to be useful, to be valuable, to have a good career, all that kind of stuff, and to move up and be more senior. You have to be able to be learning. Now, what that means is, I think, if you're whatever culture, team, organization that you're in, if that is not a part of your day-to-day, then you're going to have a really hard time keeping people. Because if they're not feeling like they're staying ahead of the industry, they will have to move. They won't have a choice. They will not have a choice. Because the alternative is to grow stagnant in skills and fall behind, which means it's harder to get the next role. People, I think, know this. And so they will move as a part of the learning and growing part, unless you can do it within your company. So I don't know. I reckon that's really important.
Do you think a person can get that in the corporate world? Or is it startup the place to be?
No, I think you can get it in the corporate world, but sometimes it can be harder. Sometimes, depending on the company and things like that, sometimes it's luck in a way. Like you may find yourself in a team or a project that puts you like out and pulls you, I guess, to grow faster. Or a leader. You might join a team that's managed by a leader who's helping to pull the team into a faster pace of growth, right? Sometimes that can be luck. Sometimes you can maybe you can coordinate it if you're good at going to interviews and interviewing the leader to find out where you think they sit on this spectrum, right? Are they the type of leader that's going to help the team grow faster? But sometimes, within a bigger corporation organization, those different leaders, they all kind of vary, I guess, in how well they do it. So sometimes you've got leaders who are able to actually create that culture for the teams. They're actually able to create a space. They're actually able to convince more senior executives or peers that this is the approach that should be taken, which is an approach that delivers the outcome, but also provides the growth opportunity for the teams. So that's all achievable, I think. It just depends upon the leader, how skilled they are at actually pulling that off. So I think it's possible, but maybe there's more variance across, different leaders within an organization will have different levels of skill at actually achieving that. So sometimes it can be hit or miss.
I'm thinking 5 minutes.
5-minute interviews.
5-minute interviews. I think I'm on board then.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm. Controversial question.
Yeah.
As soon as I go to 5 minutes, I'm thinking, what can I ask next? How can I shake the cage?
Yep.
Rattle. 2 minutes into the interview, you realize this is not it. Do you stop the interview, or do you try to gain more out of it and extend it even past 5 minutes?
Yeah, so I never really stop an interview short. I have as a candidate. Sometimes as a candidate, I'm like, this is not happening. I'm going to pull out. I'm going to leave now. So I have done that maybe once or twice. But as an interviewer, I generally won't call it early. I will call it early, but it depends what you mean by early. I will not call it anywhere under 30 minutes, right? I will go at least past that point. Part of the reason why I have had one time, so this is my one data point that says why you should never do it. It's because even if that person is not a good fit for your team for whatever reason, right, there's always a chance that they will refer you someone who is the right fit, right? And I've had that happen one time. One time I interviewed somebody and I said no to them, but they had such a good interview experience that they referred me to somebody, a friend of theirs, and they were excellent, and I hired that person. Excellent fit. So it's happened one time, and I think it's worth it just for that one time, I think, to not only does it make a good story, but it's actually like, it's a small world, right? Tech, I think, is a small world, really. People talk, people know each other. You actually want to be able to sell you as a leader, your team, your organization, because you never know. You don't know who's talking to who and who's connected to who. If you burn somebody, I don't think that's a good philosophy. It's not going to be successful. Look, maybe use it as interview practice. See some way to see something good in it, because I think trying to give people a good experience no matter what, that's the baseline for me. I want everyone to walk away with a good interview experience no matter what. Sometimes, actually, I will spend, if I know I'm not going to hire them, I've done this more than a few times, and it's worked out so far, but it's a bit high risk, is particularly when we're talking about code. So if someone's brought their code in and we've gone through the code, and if I've made the decision I'm not going to hire them, I will sometimes stop the interview halfway through and say, look, I'm not going to go forward, I'm not going to hire you. But I want to spend the rest of this time. So let's say we've got 45 minutes left or something, right? I want to spend the rest of this time going through the code with you and giving you specific feedback on your code, so that in the hope that it's valuable for you, that you've taken the time to do the coding exercise, and I can give you this feedback, and hopefully you can use that feedback to improve and grow as an engineer and get better. I'm hoping that that's what it achieves. And I asked them first, are you okay if we do that? And usually no one said no to that so far. So they've said yes. Like, okay,
it's
cool.
always the first time.
And then there might well be a first time, which is fine, But yeah, that's been actually a really great experience. Like, I've given very specific feedback on their code. I will go through line by line or point out specific things that I didn't like or that I questioned or that were maybe something that could have been done differently. And I'll give examples and say, look, if you'd done it this way, I think this way would have made more sense. And I explain why. I'm like, it's not just, it's slightly opinionated, my opinion, slightly subjective, but I do give reasons to back it up. So I will explain to them like a teaching kind of opportunity to say, look, here's how I think you could have done it. This is why. And we go through and have a conversation about it. And I don't know, I think I mean, you'd have to go back and ask those people. I've done it too in interviews, but
Yeah,
I think it's kind of valuable for people.
I'm waiting for the comments to come through on this. I'm like, hey, Dan, remember 30
Remember
minutes
that
into the
time?
interview when you were telling me to do this, I took it on board. And
Yeah.
at the next interview, they said, where did you learn this?
Well, usually I am trying to assess, like, there has to be a certain combination to be there for that to happen, because I think they have to have already shown me that they're open to feedback, for starters. And maybe it's like, maybe I'm hiring at a senior level and their skill level is not quite at that level, right? But they're open to feedback and they're looking to grow and they have all these other aspects that are really positive, right? That's, I think, the perfect opportunity to say, look, let's spend the time going through the feedback, because I mean, it's a small world, but I always enjoy teaching people, helping them grow, all that stuff. Like, I really enjoy it. So if they went out of that, I'd be really happy to hear from those people, actually, because if they took that feedback and improved and got better and got a better job and grew their career, I'd be like, that's amazing. That's awesome. Like, that's the goal, like, the more people who can grow and improve their skills, write great code, I think that's great.
I see you selling it. Yeah.
I'm selling it.
Yeah, you're
I'm
selling it.
passionate about
Yeah,
that.
you ask.
It is high risk, though. If someone says, oh, I don't know, if they're upset, they didn't get the job, and like, Dan lectured me about my code for 45 minutes, I'd be, I would. That's not the intention. And I probably have to assess whether they're open to that feedback first, because I want to
Yeah,
make sure that it's constructive.
yeah. I mean, you got to make sure that they feel comfortable.
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to give? I'm not a fan of the word feedback.
No?
No, not at all. I actually I can go as far as I hate the word feedback.
Yeah.
Right, and that's a strong statement.
People suck at feedback
Yeah,
generally, though.
and that is why
Yes.
because we've created this sudden world of you need to give me feedback, and then either we open up the gates and say give me feedback, and it's on anything, or to be honest, we're just not skilled enough to give
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for a different word for feedback. I'm working towards what can we use instead of saying, can you give me feedback?
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, too, feedback. Like, this is why I have to be careful about it in interviews as well, because you don't want a situation where it's like drive-by feedback, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, you should do this, you should do that, and then just walk away, because that doesn't really help much. I think maybe feedback on its own is probably the lowest level of value, right?
Yeah.
Because really, what is valuable is the outcome of somebody improving. The only way you do that is like continual feedback or a relationship, right? Or a trust thing where it's like, we can work together for like 6 months or something. And, I can give you feedback at small touch points. We can talk about it. We can have conversations about it. It's not like feedback. It's like, hey, let's talk about how to structure code in a certain way that I think could be better. Let's have a conversation about it as to why. It's not just it's a, hey, do better, and then just walk away. Like, that could be called feedback in some worlds, but it's not valuable.
Some people love doing that.
I know.
But I mean, in a relationship, right? Do you go to the person that you're in a relationship with and do you go like, hey, I want to give you feedback? Yeah. Is there this concept of, well, last night you were quite noisy, and this is my feedback to you. It just,
It's weird, isn't it? It's kind
yeah,
of weird.
it's like you say, to like, hey, I had a look at your code. I
Yeah.
would love to sit down and just take you through a few things that I saw that maybe could be beneficial for you. What do you think?
Yeah.
You can put
Yeah.
that in feedback. But suddenly we've created this word, and now everything is you need to get feedback. You ask
Yeah.
your peers for feedback. Do you have any feedback for me? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, I got feedback today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. I agree with you, Fred. Let's do away with feedback.
Done.
Well, I think we've had a good chat, Fred. I think we've changed the world and improved the world of interviewing everywhere.
So my final question is, why did we take so long to have this conversation if we could have done it in 5 minutes?
Oh, that's a really good question. Maybe it's like it takes a lifetime of committed skill and growth to be able to bring something into a 5-minute window. And maybe we're just still on the journey, Fred. We're just still trying to work things through so that we can get to the ultimate 5-minute utopia.
I'm thinking donuts. 5 minutes of
Donuts go a
donuts.
long way.
Thanks for the chat, Dan.
Thank you, Fred. We will continue this conversation, I'm sure, in future talks.
Absolutely.